Hi, good evening. Welcome to episode 1 of the book club. We're going to do this for about 6 weeks, going over the book Fork in the Road by Dr. Jen Unwin. I know several of you have gotten copies of this and are reading along, and I'm excited to go through it with you. But even if you don't have a copy of the book, it can be beneficial to listen to. Sorry, we're starting a little bit late. Clinic just pushed me a little hard today, so I have a few minutes getting in here. So hope you got your book. If you do have questions or comments along the way, I'm going to try to keep up with them. I can kind of see them over here to the side, but let me tell you, sometimes it's hard for me to focus on more than one thing at a time. So if I don't stop and address your question or don't address it and you put something out there, you have a comment and we don't address it, I'll try to get it in the comments after the show down the road. So if you have your book, open up and let's get going. So if you have started reading this book, you have probably noticed that they are not in the US. There's a lot of words in here like biscuits. I thought a biscuit was something you put gravy and butter and bacon on, and they were big and fluffy biscuits. I don't think they're talking about those biscuits. I'm pretty sure they're talking about the biscuits like the cookie biscuit type things is maybe what they call them in England. So the book is set up. It's mainly written by Dr. Unwin, but then she puts in several dialogues or tidbits of other people. And in the beginning, she tells you who those other people are. So it's mainly her husband, a couple other doctors, and a lady named Anna who runs Sugar RX, which is a great website, Benton Johnson, which is a great addiction specialist, and other people. So look through those. They each have their individual websites listed, and each of them might bring a new level of hope or insight for you. So check those out. I know I personally have looked at and listened to Benton Johnson a lot for some of her lectures and trying to help my clients here at the clinic. So today we're going to go through the first 2 sections. We're going to start right there in the foreword. And the foreword is written by Dr. David Unwin. And Dr. David Unwin is Jen's husband. He has been a practicing general practitioner just like myself since 1986. I haven't been practicing that long. I started practicing in 2015. But he made a note. He noticed that early on in his practice, there was not people with this great level of obesity. Diabetes was not prevalent. And now when he's in clinic every day, he's seeing people with a level of obesity that we would consider very great and burdensome. And he's seeing diabetes, he's seeing all the complications. And I can 100% agree with that. When I started practicing 19 years ago, people with a BMI of over 35 were the rarity, and now we see that quite a bit. Diabetes was something I treated every once in a while, and now, at least half of my patients that are primary care suffer from and have diabetes. He made a statement, and it hit home for me. He said, "For years, I prescribed different drugs for each of these conditions, but began to realize each drug was just a sticking plaster, which didn't address the basic problem, which was what my patients were eating." And man, I wrote out there, preach, because that's my practice. That's what I was doing. I was putting Band-Aids on things, and that's what medications do. Most medications, unless it's for an antibiotic or like an infection and you're getting an antibiotic, they're not curative. They're not curative medicines. They're Band-Aids. They're controlling the symptoms. For example, diabetes, if you're taking a diabetes medication and it's controlling your blood sugar, that's what it's doing. It's bringing your blood sugar down, but it's not removing your diabetes. It's not taking that away. It's a Band-Aid that's getting put on there. So did the statistics strike you that second paragraph in the US, more than half of all adults 65 years of age or older, that's 54%, report taking 4 or more prescription drugs? Did that surprise you? It did me. I mean, I knew that over half of our population in the US had metabolic syndrome and suffered with obesity, but I didn't realize, and I see this, I don't know why it didn't strike me that over half of them were taking 4 or more prescriptions, but that second sentence, that they're taking 4 or more prescription drugs and they don't feel good. So why are we taking these drugs? They're Band-Aids, and we're doing that, but they don't feel good. And further down in that paragraph, I wrote same with big exclamation point. I had to come to realize the answers to so many of chronic illnesses lie not in drugs, but in lifestyle change. And that's me. I spent the first half of my career aimlessly just prescribing drugs and treating symptoms. And now I realize That's not helping anything. That's not getting us any healthier. It's not getting us anywhere down the road. I had to focus on lifestyle change. And thankfully for Dr. Unwin, he had this great resource in his pocket. His wife was is a clinical psychologist who focused in addiction and also focused her studies on hope, which is super cool to me. And he realized just how important hope was in treating obesity and treating chronic conditions and in treating addiction. So, page 12. Before I tended to just tell patients what to do, whereas Jen taught me to factor in personal goals and supply feedback. Guys, I'm still totally working on this. I get this wrong all the time. I am very good about coming in and just say, hey, just do this. All right, this is what you do. You swap this out for that. This is what we need to move on to. I really got to get better at making this your goal and making you guys come up with the idea of how to change and not just inserting myself into this. So, but through this process, so he brought Jen in, they started working on hope, they started working on lifestyle change. Through this process, his practice transformed and it became completely different. And a result of this practice was that, and he kept up with this, he tracked it and kept great notes in his published studies. He has published studies on this to show the proof of it, that in his practice, they spend $68,000 less per year on drugs for diabetes. That's just diabetes, not even high blood pressure, not the rest of them. They spend less. That's like a bam, mic drop moment. You change people's lives. Look how much money we save. I have a student that's back with me in the clinic now. She was here earlier this year. Kathy, if you get to see her, say hi. She's wonderful. She loves working with people on lifestyle change and obesity and has her own story. We recorded that a while back. We were talking at lunch, reading through the figures of, the GLP-1s, the weight loss drugs are big out on the market, and how much they cost and how much that it's going to cost if we open access up to everyone that's there. And I think with just Medicare alone, if we opened access to everyone that's on it, we're talking trillions of dollars. This one drug alone, if we start giving it out to everyone that could use it and could benefit from it, man, we're going to bankrupt our system in a matter of months. It's not going to end well for us in healthcare in the US. It's not ending well for us right now when we're getting sicker and whatnot. But this brings me hope. You make these changes, you make these lifestyle changes, you give the patient hope and you get them back. And guess what? Your cost goes down and the cost of healthcare goes down. And then the cost of health insurance goes down. And then the cost of other things go down. It's a trickle-like effect. So middle of page 12, as they worked with people cutting out sugar and starchy foods from their diet, Jen and I were struck by how much happier they seemed. Some even came off antidepressants after many years. Really? I mean, really? Yeah, it's truth. And we see that here in clinic too, that people's overall life satisfaction, joy, when you start eliminating those processed foods and sugars and things, and they're free from that, they feel better. Their mental clarity is better. They are able to reduce some of those medicines. Now, I don't always get off of them, but they oftentimes can reduce them. We see that when you're removing these toxins from the body, you're able to make more serotonin, retain more serotonin of your natural things, which is what these drugs are helping to do. That was pretty awesome. And then he went in to talk about Jen's story a little bit. And I don't know if you have related to Jen's story. I relate to Jen's story. If you did relate, please tell other people about it. So they've known each other. Jen and David have known each other since childhood. And he's watched her weight just kind of do this roller coaster thing. And it would change by as much as 3 stones. I love stones. Why can't we count in stones instead of pounds here in the US? But anyways, 3 stones is equal to about 44 pounds. Her cycle would go up and down. And at this size, it would be this wardrobe and this size. And guys, I'm not joking. For a long time, I had my this weight wardrobe in a container, the clothes that I'm in now in my closet, and the size smaller in another container. So it's just kind of cycling back and through in and out of those. And he said, this is just a typical cycle. Jen would tell him she hated being overweight. She hated her body. She had found this new diet that she was going to try. And how many of you can identify with that? You've tried every diet that's out there. You've tried every plan that's out there, every over-the-counter pill, every whatnot. It's keep going through. But in months and days leading up to that diet, he noticed a pattern with Jen. She would get more anxious and she would start to panic and she would start to eat more and shove more in. That diet's coming. We got to get this in. I'm not going to have this for a while. Who relates to that? I mean, surely I'm not the only person that relates to that. And then she would start this new diet. And what would happen? She start to feel in control again. And she start to feel happier again. I relate with that too. You start on that plan, you start getting healthier, you start seeing the weight move and your emotions, and everything can change. And thank you, Starla, for letting me know that I'm not the only one out there that is, can identify with these things. So every diet that Jen went on, she'd lose a lot of weight and she would look fabulous. And he'd notice that she would look fabulous, but he would start to become anxious for her because he knew it wouldn't last. It's that falling off the wagon. And, the end could be Christmas, or it could be a different holiday, or it could just be a random night out with friends or whatnot. And he noticed if he said anything, it made it worse. So he would just stay silent. But very soon we would start this cycle over again and we would be gaining weight again. So meanwhile, in their clinic, they're using these processes for their patients to help their patients get well. And he would see the same pattern in them. He'd say initially they do great, they do very well. And then a stressor would happen or a holiday would happen or something. They would allow themselves that one treat. And then here we go, we're off the wagon and the weight would pile back on. And they finally sat down and realized that that weight had a strange similarity to other things that they were treating: tobacco abuse, alcohol addiction, that they were noticing those same exact patterns with them as that they were noticing with diet. And they finally realized it all fits, that it's not just the patient being lazy. It's not just the patient not being compliant, that there's a true medical model out there that explains this. Sugar and other carbohydrates are addictive, and they're foods that are drugs and not necessarily nourishment. And while the remedy for addiction is quite simple, it's not easy. And that remedy is complete abstinence. It's complete abstinence from the substance. You can't have the alcoholic, have a beer every once in a while. That doesn't work. Someone who's addicted to cocaine or pills can't just do it every once in a while because it's a party or it's a celebration. They have to practice complete abstinence from those products. And he's tells that, during Jen's life and during her struggles, she had to identify all of her triggers, and there were lots of triggers. And some of those triggers were kind of easy things that you notice, like alcohol was a trigger, or, sugar was a trigger, candy. I tell everybody, Snicker bars, trigger for me. Can't do it. I can't eat Snicker, can't eat Baby Ruths, not even one, not a bite, can't do it. Rocky Road ice cream is on there. So are French fries. Those are big triggers for me. But there were some that surprised them that were triggers, like nuts and cheese ended up being big triggers for Jen. So, sometimes even foods that are very healthy can be foods that will trigger addictive tendencies and trigger you to eat more. And so therefore, if a good, healthy food in general, it triggers you to not be well, you can't eat that. But in the end, it's very freeing to let that go and to be free from that addiction on the same side. I wanted to point out this story at the bottom of page 13, where he said one young person recently presented with sleep apnea, requesting bariatric surgery to put an end to it all. A year later, off carbs and sugar, off booze, off cigarettes, they are 8 stones down. Once again, I love the stones. That's 112 pounds in a year. And they had started jogging. Now, the reason I wanted to point that out is, one, they had bariatric surgery-like results with making those specific lifestyle changes, the same lifestyle changes that we recommend to you guys. But hear me in this. In situations like this, surgery would not have fixed the problem. There's a huge increase in depression and suicide after surgery. And a lot of that, I've heard it described by many surgeons as you've removed your best friend. the thing that you always went to for comfort, the thing that you always went to satisfy those empty holes that immediately overnight went away, and people don't know how to cope. And I have many patients who have had bariatric surgery, and it initially is very successful, but they let those foods back in and stop focusing on the protein and the whole foods. And then the addiction triggers again, and they push past the pain in their stomach from the surgery and they end up gaining weight. So let's look at pages 14 and 15 now. I put on the big top of my book, I put confusion, because this is where everybody can get confused. Carbohydrate, sugar, and sources of glucose explained. What is a carb, and what is sugar, and what is that? There are some areas of nutrition where it's easy to become confused, and this is one of them. So do they mean the stuff just like the table sugar, or what do they mean? So all foods we eat are composed of protein, fat, and carbohydrate, 3 macronutrients. There's a 4th macronutrient, alcohol, but I don't think that's very essential, so I don't really count it that much. So protein, fat, and carbohydrate are the macronutrients. Carbohydrates, as the name suggests, are made up of 3 elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And this is what a plant makes to store their energy. So they absorb the energy from the sun and go through that process called photosynthesis. Go think back to your elementary school education there. But they're basically, the plant is storing sugar for energy for the plant's use. Sugar has many, many names. It's not just as easy as looking for the word sugar, and that's why it can be very confusing. The proper names of all sugars end in OUS. So that is something you can look at. You can look for words on the back of a package that end in OUS, and if it ends in OUS, then it is a sugar. So they have down here in these nice, pretty colorful things, 6 main types of sugar. So fructose, which is sugar from fruit and honey. Natural sugar, but sugar nonetheless. Lactose, which is sugar from milk. Glucose, which is the simple sugar from plants. Maltose, which is the sugar from beer. Sucrose, which is your table sugar, and how they'll refer to that through the rest of the book. But note that sucrose is a mixture of fructose and glucose. So it's a mixture of the sugar from plants and a mixture of the sugar from fruits and honey. And then dextrose, which is corn sugar. Did you guys know there were that many sugars? And then they hide them in 10 million other names. So how can something be a carb and taste sweet, but not, and then turn to sugar? Like I'm not saying that right. How can something be a carb, and when it goes in your mouth, it's not tasting sweet, but your body turns it into sugar? In this first little paragraph up here explains it. It says, if you make a huge supermolecule, and do a supermolecule over to the side, by joining lots of glucose molecules together, you just made a starch. So when you think about your potato or your bread, it's a glucose linked to a glucose, linked to a glucose, linked to a glucose. It's just a bunch of different glucose molecules all linked together. This is the way that plants have found to store lots of sugar. The process of digestion breaks starchy food like bread, rice, potatoes, breakfast cereals back down into surprising quantities of glucose. So when you eat those things, that is a super molecule of all the glucose joined together and put them in your stomach, and it breaks it down, then guess what? It just becomes all the simple sugars and it becomes blood glucose out in your body. You may have heard of the low GI diet, which is referring to the glycemic index, which it kind of ranks carbohydrates in the amount of sugar that they have, or their propensity to raise blood sugar in relation to pure glucose. So their pure glucose counts as 100, and then it's an index based off of that, comparing everything. He used the example of a small bowl of rice. Will put your glucose up approximately the same extent as 10 teaspoons of sugar. And Dr. Unwin is pretty famous for his infographics where he's comparing the amount of sugar in things. So our diets contain 3 common sources of sugar-rich foods. So there's the naturally sweetened foods like honey, raisins, apples, and bananas. There's foods sweetened with table sugar like cakes, biscuits, and low-fat foods. And then there's starchy carbohydrates that digest down into glucose like the bread, potatoes, or rice. On page 16, you can see one of Dr. David Unwin's infographics that are there. I highlighted a couple that I wanted to point out. The first one, the chocolate Rice Krispies at 24 teaspoons of sugar. I think everyone kind of knew they were full of sugar. Did you know they had 24 teaspoons of sugar? I did not. Honey. A lot of people think they can just eat honey endlessly, but 4 grams measures out to 17 teaspoons of sugar, so almost sweeter than pure glucose. Raisins. So 4 grams of raisins is 17 teaspoons of sugar. And then I started apple juice. So 4 grams of apple juice, or that 100 grams per ml, is the equivalent of 3.5 ounces. So not even quite what we would consider a whole glass. So a whole glass of 100% natural, no sugar added apple juice, or a partial glass, is 4 teaspoons of sugar. So if you're doing a 7-ounce glass, which is even small compared to some people's glasses of apple juice, it's the same, has approximately the same effect on blood glucose as 8 teaspoons 8 teaspoons of table sugar, the stuff. So fructose. A lot of people think that fructose is okay because it is natural. It's just the fruit and it's coming from that. He mentions Dr. Lustwig. Dr. Lustwig does a lot of work with pediatrics, but he also does a lot of work explaining why fructose is not necessarily good for you. Fructose particularly puts an extra big burden on the liver to digest it and break it down. And so when you're breaking that down, you can create more fatty liver because of that. And in the US, I don't know if you guys remember the big explosion of high fructose corn syrup. That's got a lot of fructose in it, as long as other sugars too. And when everything started getting that put in it because it was a cheap and affordable sugar, we really started seeing a rise of obesity and fatty liver. And that is not a good thing. So fructose is not necessarily great for you. Now, at the end of, I think this is getting to the end of Dr. Unwin's little part, he was saying that he's come to understand that I have come to understand there are as many individual diets as there are people. It can be a long journey to find the diet that suits you to achieve your goals. And just because one diet works for one person doesn't mean that it's going to work for the next person. So keep that in mind. You can't exactly have the same exact diet as somebody else, and you got to find what works for you. I love this sentence near the end of that paragraph. For some of us, the crocodile in the waters of choice is food addiction, meaning that for some of us, the whole problem is that we're consuming foods that our body is addicted to, and you have to remove those foods in order to be free from them. Yeah, so I have a question here. It says, I am mostly on a carnivore diet. However, I do enjoy a glass of bourbon on occasion. Sugar, yay, nay. So yes, alcohol does break down into sugar. Bourbon, as long as it is not got sugar added to it, is actually fairly low in sugar. And if you're drinking it in moderation on occasion, I think that's okay. But also keep in mind it could be a trigger to eat, and alcohol is a toxin to the body. And so until you get into the place where you would consider super healthy, you may want to completely avoid and sustain from alcohol altogether. And then when you're healthier, maybe you can enjoy that glass of bourbon on occasion. I would say if you still got a lot of weight to lose, your liver's probably still got a lot of fat in it and doesn't break down alcohol as well as it should either. And so you're adding insult to injury there while you're trying to lose weight. So you may want to wait until you are through your weight loss journey. All right. So her introduction is really short, and we're going to get through that. And then next week, I'll outline what we're going to do next week and the following weeks. So the introduction is written by Jen. Page 19, the main sentence I want to point out is the very first highlighted part. This knowledge has finally enabled me to overcome decades of struggles with weight, food cravings, and the growing hopelessness of finding a long-term solution. So I wanted to point that out just because it brings hope. It definitely brings hope. And so going over to page 20, when you're looking at Jen's first paragraph there, I noticed some big words like tragic, life-threatening illness, strain on the family. And then she writes, I was still only young and I turned increasingly to food for comfort and amusement. I bet there's a lot of us out there that if you look back and think hard enough, you are using food to cover up some pretty big emotions that you didn't know how to deal with. And that's very, very common. She says, I love sneaking food from the kitchen, buttered toast, hot milk with loads of sugar, condensed milk, baking chocolate, or whatever was available. Yeah, she's sneaking it. If you're sneaking it, that's another sign of addiction. And then she's doing this at a child. Needless to say, by 12 years old, she was over 12 stones, 170 pounds is what she weighed, in new money. She hated being overweight, but looking back, I can see I was already addicted to sugar. She got the shakes if I couldn't eat regularly, and eating was how I managed boredom and other emotional states. So I get a lot of people that come to the clinic and they tell me they can't fast or they can't not have multiple snacks during the day because they will get shaky, become hypoglycemic. So hypoglycemia most of the time is a result of hyperglycemia. Your sugar spiked, your insulin spiked in response to it. Your body was stubborn in listening to it. And a couple hours later, when your body finally listened to it, your sugar plummets and you're on the sugar roller coaster. And the only way to get off the sugar roller coaster and to manage hypoglycemia appropriately and not in the way that most doctors tell you to, which is to eat all the time and eat multiple small snacks, is to eliminate the refined carbohydrates. You can include more fibrous ones if you want to, and increase protein in your diet so that your sugar stays more like this instead of this. So get off the sugar roller coaster. In Georgia's story down here, Georgia is one of the experts that she refers to a lot in this book, and said she recalled when she was young, her mom would give her and her siblings $1 the first of every month to go buy whatever they wanted, and she always picked onion potato chips and a bag of M&Ms. So we've got our starchy carbohydrate with salt added with sugar. And she even remembers being 10 years of age, sneaking to the kitchen to get a banana. So banana, whole food, normal food that most people eat, but it's a trigger food for her. It was a sugar hit for her. She would go back to bed and hide under her covers. People say fruit isn't sugar, but my cravings for fruit were just as strong as my cravings for chips, candy, and ice cream. And I've met other people that are that way, and it may vary by type of fruit. Then she talks about this candy bar that came out, and she saw it on TV, and she started obsessing about it. Couldn't stop obsessing about it. And that's pretty common in food addiction when you're just constantly obsessing. Now we're back to Jen talking up here. She said she went on several crazy diets with her mom over the young teenage years. And I wrote up top, can you say Weight Watchers in the 1990s and to 2010? I think every mom with an overweight kid took their kid to Weight Watchers. And honestly, it has scarred the heck out of so many people. We did bad things to our kids taking them to Weight Watchers in the 80s and 90s and early 20s, 10s stuff. Anyways, she finally managed to lose weight. And what was her magic formula? She ate boiled eggs for breakfast, an apple and Edam cheese for lunch, and dinner without the carby parts of the meal or pudding. That is technically a low carb diet. I know apples are not typically considered low carb, but if she's doing a small organic apple, that's only 15 carbs. And if you look, that's very minimal for her total day for what she was eating overall. She would be thrilled with her results, but then she would try to moderate her relationship with food and carbs to bring them back in so she could include those. And as she tried to moderate them, the amounts just crept back in and the weight crept back up. And she realized that throughout these decades of dieting, it was just cyclical misery. That's what it was. It was cyclical misery, one after another. She really disliked being overweight, but she really loved eating. Really loved eating, and it seemed like a unsolvable puzzle. And then later in her life, in her 40s, I actually got there sooner than her. Thank you that I got there sooner than her. She stumbled across a book because she kind of stumbled across the truth, and I did too. When I started doing low carb, I had no idea I was doing low carb. I just remembered things like my great grandmother saying, if you wanted to lose weight, you had to cut out the biscuits and the cookies and the treats and that kind of thing, and just eat some meat and vegetables. So that's what I did. I kept it simple and was like, if it's a meat and it's a vegetable, I'll eat it. And I didn't eat potatoes because they reminded me of bread. And then I learned, oh, wait, this is a real thing. I hadn't even heard of Atkins at the time when I did that. But when she stumbled across that book, it was the beginning of her food freedom. She said the knowledge of that book was about low carb or keto diets and why they worked. And she finally understood the science behind it, the hormonal science behind why these diets work and help people get through. Now, I don't know if any of you experienced keto flus or withdrawals, but Jen really experienced keto flus and withdrawals. It took her about 8 days until her body finally converted and learned to burn fat instead of glucose for fuel. But she soon felt better than she had in years, both mentally and physically. Now we're over on page 22. The low carb eating was a big part of the answer for me and many others, but not the whole story. So lots of things have tripped her up over the years. She acknowledges that there's been many things that have tripped her up, but she's learned about those triggers and eliminated them one at a time and learned to deal with the food struggles and build in safety nets. And if you take a look at the little world that is down here at the bottom, it kind of just, it's showing how this book is going to work and showing about Jen's past origin story. So what are we going to do the next 5 weeks? If you notice, there are 7 chapters. One of them is resources. One of them is recipes. So next week, we're going to cover chapter 1. Are you a carbohydrate addict? That's where we're going to start. And if you know somebody who you think might be a carbohydrate addict, even if they're not following along with the book, maybe ask them to join us next week as we go through that chapter. And then we will do chapter 2 the following week, and then 3. The 4th week, we'll skip down to chapter 5, and then we'll finish up with chapter 6. So I hope that this discussion has been beneficial. I hope you found little nuggets in the forward and introduction of the book. I can't wait to dive in and get into the actual content chapters of it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and invite a friend next week. Take care.